Hi everyone, my name is Carlota. I'm a nurse working in New York City. I work very closely with Julian Watkins and we work for the city, but we also have something called the People's Clinic, which we're representing right now. But Julian, could you speak a little bit about the People's Clinic and introduce yourself as well?
Okay, yeah. Well, hi everyone. I'm Julian Watkins. I'm an internal medicine doctor. I work for the city of New York as well. We both work at the health department. But apart from our everyday work at the health department, we started the two of us. We started this project called the People's Clinic as a way to just give information, the rapidly changing information that's coming in around COVID-19, to get out to people, just to kind of give a more people-focused, easy to digest and understand explanation of things, some recommendations and some practical guidance that could help guide people through this crazy time. And so this is kind of who we are. We are working independently. This is not representing anything to do with the health department, but we are just using our knowledge and experience through our daily work to bring information to people. Currently, I'm still on assignment for the coronavirus response from the city. And so I get, daily updates from the city, getting, up-to-date guidance on testing, recommendations from the city, recommendations from the CDC, the latest medical evidence. And so we wanted to bring some information and updates today, since it's been a few weeks since we were here last. We're a few weeks into the pandemic. We're a few weeks into isolation, a few months rather. And as outside of New York City, we see a lot of places are opening up. And we just wanted to talk about what opening up looks like, reopening, what it could look like in New York City, and what it means to open up, and the considerations that kind of go into opening up, the decision to open up, and what to do with the information when we're presented with reopening, or just in general guidance and recommendations coming out from local and national and international bodies. So I guess some of the updates I wanted to talk about, the big one I would say is the serology testing. A lot of people have been requesting it. We know that it's out there, and we know that you can get it. It's not something that the city is offering to people. And I would say about a week or two ago, the city actually came down with some guidance, or their recommendation, or their stance rather, on the serology testing, specifically for antibody testing for COVID-19. So there are multiple testing varieties or ways to test for if you have the COVID-19 or other SARS-CoV-19, the virus that's causing coronavirus. But basically, some of the things, even though we have a positive test and we can detect or directly or indirectly detect that someone has or had the virus, some of that information may not be able to tell us things that we want to know. Sometimes the testing can just show us, yes, it was present or it is present, but we don't know what it means, especially for this antibody testing. So to go back a little bit, an antibody is a protein complex that all of our bodies make in response to a pathogen or an organism. And so it's an indirect way to tell if there's a test out there where they can check your blood and check for a protein that's like for the coronavirus virus, that pathogen. We know that if you have the antibody, you likely had the infection, but we don't know what it means going forward if you do have the antibody. So a lot of debate is out there of what do we do? Should everyone just get antibody testing? Getting antibody testing, it's good for all of us, for us to know how many people have the virus in the city. But what do we do once we know that they have the antibody test positive? We don't know if having the antibody offers any protection, long-term, short-term, if it offers any immunity. We don't know what the antibody means if in a few months, does the antibody wear off, and are you resusceptible, or are you always positive for this thing? And you could possibly get it again, and then you just have the one antibody test, and once you got it forever. And so then the antibody test is kind of moot at that point. So there's a recent journal article that was like a review that was published by the Journal of the American Medical Association, came out on the 6th. And they summarize a lot of the testing available. And even on this, on May the 6th, the Journal of the American Medical Association kind of took a similar stance that the New York City has taken, where at this point, we don't know enough about the antibody testing to even offer it broadly, because it's an indirect test. It's testing for an antibody. It's not testing for the virus itself. And then we don't know what that positive test means. Some people will say, well, if I want to know if I have it, I should do the antibody test. But there's a better way to understand if you have it. Having the antibody test may not show how acute it is or if it's actively in the body at the time. So, and we have something that we know more about, which is the PCR, which is a viral DNA test, which is a commonly used test out now. That's the one that's more readily available. So we can use, if we're looking to diagnose and to track how many people have this thing, at this point, it's better to do the viral DNA test versus the antibody test. Eventually, yes, we would want to do an antibody test to know, but at this point in the epidemic, where we're still sheltering in place, it's better to stay home until we know more about this antibody test, and we can actually make guidance based on what we do know about the antibody test. Then we should get it. I know that's probably a whole lot of talking, and it's a lot to kind of process. But are there any questions or comments? Or Carlota, would you like to say anything before we? Yeah.
So I definitely think like any questions, comments, like please like let us know. So the other thing I just wanted to like add upon is that like Julian was saying, like we don't know if your antibodies show that you had COVID, doesn't know if you're like have immunity to it. And so I think a lot of people have this sort of false sense that like, oh well, if my antibody test comes back positive, that means I'm protected, I'm safe. But like we just don't, there's so much about this virus that we don't know, that we don't understand, and that we're finding out day by day. And so like, I think it's just good to know and like have that in your context, where like there's just still just so much that we don't know what it's going to look like and how this is going to play out. And then in addition to that, like there is a bunch of people that are coming up and saying, like companies are just saying like, oh, we have an antibody test, it's out in public, you should use it. But really, like as of like mid-April, there was only 3 antibody tests that were approved by the FDA. So currently right now, like you have to market and sort of get your test out there, you have to be approved by the FDA. But the FDA is trying to be like a little more strict on how they do things, but they're also in an emergency scenario where they're approving tests just sort of in this emergency time. But really, out of all the tests that are out there, as of like the end of April, there was only 3 that were approved by the FDA. So there's going to be also a lot of people, I think, companies marketing like, oh, there's this COVID stay at home, like test that you can do from home, prick your finger, different things like that. But like actually none of those have been approved by the FDA, or do we know if they're like actually legitimate testing or sources to go through?
So there was a question about the difference between the testing, and when we look for viruses or bacteria, when we're looking to diagnose a disease, there's many ways that we can test for a viral thing. And we're trying to identify a pathogen, a specific pathogen. So the test that's out now that's readily available is a direct test looking for the virus DNA. This is the common test that when you're getting the nasal swab and all of that, that's that test. That's the one that we know if you have the actual virus in your body at that time, or any evidence of it, or any of the viral DNA, that test is proven and we know that it will detect that. It's been around a lot longer than this antibody test, which is an indirect way to check for this infection. So the antibody test is an indirect way. It's checking for a set of proteins that the body makes in response to that viral pathogen. So having the antibody test will show, yes, you're making some proteins that let us know that you came in contact with that thing. At this point, all we know is that we know what the proteins look like that your body makes if you come in contact with it. We don't know the significance of having those proteins, what it means. So if we're looking to diagnose this thing, It's better to go through the DNA test, which is a direct test, which shows the presence of the virus, and we know since it's been around longer, we know we can trust it a little bit more just because there's been so many tests and it's been validated. Carlota talked a little bit on the next kind of topic that we wanted to discuss, which was FDA approval. And I think it all kind of speaks to the bigger picture of when a lot of decisions are made and drugs and medications are approved or tests are approved or policy and procedures are made, these are government entities. And now more than ever before, I'd say, when we look at how some of these governments operate, and our government in particular, you can see how a federal body or institution can be influenced by these outside factors. And so sometimes these institutions may not move as fast as they need to be. They may not be as quick to respond. They may not be they may not take a lot of other things into account. Sometimes there are political, like money issues and other things that come to like FDA approving things. A good example from before was HIV, where it took a lot of on the ground grassroots activism to be able to get the FDA to respond to approve vital medications to save people's lives. Even things where the testing where it was early, but people were desperate. It was a lot of this on the ground activism that it ultimately got them to respond as fast as they did. Because otherwise it can take years to develop some medications. So when we think about these government entities, they're not always benevolent. And so I think you got to kind of have to take it all in and understand what the context is. I think for the testing, sure, we want to make sure that if we're testing, we want to make sure that it's right. We want to make sure that it's validated and that the result that we get can be trusted so that we're making the correct decisions. But when we think about some other decisions that are made by government agencies, we kind of want to take some context and take that all in. And this is transitioning to isolation and relieving the isolation orders and getting back into the real world and reopening. And you can see in the American South, a lot of states where there have cities that are hotspots and that have a lot of new cases and that still have hundreds of deaths a day, specifically in Georgia, where certain political decisions are made based on economics and not necessarily the best thing for people. And you see states opening and then this big concern that there could be, second waves. So my point in all of this is just when they do start opening, you kind of have to make these decisions for yourself and not necessarily trust that some of these decisions are being made in our best interest. A lot of politicians we've seen them on the news, who then they're talking, people will die. We're going to lose people. It's inevitable. Things happen. And from their viewpoint, of course, because they don't know these people. But when you are the people, or your loved ones are the people who could potentially die, reopening and possibly re-exposing yourself and your loved ones to a whole different world and a whole different set of circumstances, I think it's very valid to take some time and actually think about the context and think about who's giving you the message and who's telling you it's safe to go out.
And what I just want to add upon too is that there will be a second or third wave. Until we have a vaccine, there will be second, third, fourth waves. And so I think it's not something that's easy, people want to hear, or even for me, it's hard for me to digest that. But this is going to continue to happen until we actually have a vaccine. And so it is true. You just want to take into account okay, a lot of us can't work from home. A lot of us don't have the ability to work from home. In New York City right now, the majority, a huge population, specifically Black and Latinos, are unable to do the work that we do from home. And so I think what Julian said is just right. Think about the context, but also be wary about hearing news that other cities are opening up, or the weather is getting nicer. So I think every human has a natural tendency to want to get some vitamin D, but we still need to be very cautious.
Yeah. That said,
Can I ask a question? Sorry.
Let me just say one thing
please,
before
please,
you ask. I'll just say it's not all hopeless. So there are things that we are doing, and isolation, like we are doing, is a bigger, broader move that we can do. But if we can get the rate of new infections down, then the city and these people have better ways to do this. So if we can get the number of new infections down, then we can actually use health investigators to do these isolation tactics so that we can be focused and focus on and be more accurate and limit the isolation to the people who are sick and infectious and to the people in their circles, so that we don't have to use such a big, broad sweeps and steps to suppress this thing. So there is hope, and the city is actively hiring people to do these investigations. And the Department of Health is partnering with health and hospitals, the service that operates the hospitals, the public hospitals in the city. This is a thing that is happening now, and it's something that's coming. And as I think, hopefully, as we do a phased reopening, that the contact tracing and some of these more focused and specific tools can be used, so that we can open up and loosen restrictions while increasing capacity to track this thing down and to isolate this thing and to get it under control. Sorry, keep going. I just wanted to take out, it's not all fire and brimstone.
Totally. No, thank you so much for the whole introduction already, gave a lot of answer without the questions. But I have one more specific question, just because. So my partner was sick for 2 weeks. It was a sickness that seemed resembling some kind of a light COVID. She never had a high fever. She never really had a crazy issues with breathing, but she had a cough. She has sore throats. She has running nose, and then she had this eye infection, which at that time we hadn't really heard that it was something to do with COVID, but she had this pus in her eye, and it was kind of heavy for a few days. And now I never got sick. I never got any sort of symptoms whatsoever, even though we shared a small New York apartment, and I cooked and cleaned for her the entire time she was there, and we were in contact the entire time before that. And now it's been 3 weeks since she's been good. And we went to do an antibody test, CDMD, 3 days ago. We both checked negative.
Yeah.
And now it's very confusing, because I have no doubts in my mind, especially after having read so much more since she was sick, of how a lot of her symptoms that we didn't know were related seem to be very related to it.
Yeah.
And so what do you think that means?
So there's a couple things. I'll say a lot of things can present like an acute viral illness, and all of this was happening still in the midst of cold and flu season. So it's very possible that she had one of the common things that are still out there and were still infecting people when coronavirus hit. It sounds, the eye thing kind of sways me a little bit away. A conjunctivitis with pus would make me think something more bacterial, especially if she was having fever type symptoms and stuff. And it could have been maybe something bacterial, which kind of could present similar to the symptoms of this coronavirus. Because when you think about it, the body has very few it has a lot of ways to react to things, but certain things elicit certain reactions. And a lot of respiratory viruses in the coronavirus family can cause, these upper airway type symptoms, and it's going to all kind of look similar. Sometimes it can be really worse in the case of, pandemic flu or this coronavirus. Some strains are a lot more mild, where people don't feel it. Some people get an ear thing. There's a broad range. So it may have just been that she was lucky that she didn't get this new thing, but she had something else that made her pretty sick. But I think that case is you guys are a good example of someone where the antibody test if the question was, I got sick and I want to know if I had it, that's when I'd recommend the antibody test for that, right? But if you are sick and you're not feeling well, or someone in your house is not feeling well, you shouldn't get an antibody test or be running to get an antibody test, because that's not going to really give a lot of information on what's going on right now. And then for people who just want it, if you're not answering the question as if I had it or not, and if you don't really need to know that right now, then probably wait out getting the antibody test, because things are still kind of wild and there's no real point. If it's not going to change what you're going to do, you probably shouldn't get the antibody test for now.
Do you think that like the chances of 2 false negatives are very slim, or?
I would have to know what type of test that CityMD was using. There's no the particulars of that and how specific is it and how sensitive it is, because there are. Yeah, go ahead.
So what I was just gonna say is like also antibody response to an infection could be different in each person. So it could show up, like antibodies could show up for coronavirus anywhere from like days to, but also could take weeks for them to be detectable, And so that could be a thing. So these are brand new tests. They're not going to be 100% like reliable and specific, but also like think about it, like every human develops, is developing symptoms to this differently, but also like the same is going to happen with your blood developing the antibodies.
Okay, my uncle got antibodies that they're both going to check. Neither had been saying one came out negative. Yeah. So there was a question, or there was a statement about a family member who lived in a house with a partner, and they both got an antibody test. One came back positive, one came back negative, and they live within close quarters. None of them had gotten sick, So we know someone has the antibody, and that's basically all we know. Because we don't know what it means. We don't know what to say about that. It literally just stops. This person has the antibody until we have more knowledge about how this thing works, and we can like make these timelines and kind of see, okay, X number of people had it, and then over the course of 5 months, 1 year, 0 people got reinfected. Then that would let us know, okay, so this immunity is long term. Versus, by the next season, 100% of those people got it, then we'd know the immunity is only transient.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then just to add on to what Julian said, like we do need more knowledge on this, right? So like it's still like, even though we've been here for weeks, like we still are only in like our infancy of like trying to understand this virus and like how it shows up in the body, how it shows up in our blood. In addition to that, like New York City is going to be doing a huge study of first responders, and that's going to include nurses, it's going to include police officers, fire department, like the fire department, and they're going to do this like these tests to see if there's antibodies in the frontline workers. But it's going to be a huge study that's going to take time to sort of collect this data, but we'll be able to sort of see a picture of like, okay, like how are antibodies showing up in first responders across New York City? And I think that's going to be like helpful to give us a picture, but right now we don't have any body of knowledge is helping us figure out how reliable these tests are, or how like how useful they are going to be to us going forward in this coronavirus pandemic.
So yeah, we don't know about easing restrictions, but a lot of the people who are doing their due diligence, the jurisdictions that are, they kind of have their own guidelines for what they want to do. And, each place is specific. If you think about United States, it's a huge landmass. The North America is a huge landmass. And you have to look at all these jurisdictions as individual entities and individual places that have their own individual, pandemic going on. And so what's good for New York is not going to be what's good for Dallas or what's good for San Francisco, because you have to deal with what the situation is in the city. So I know that even for the state versus the city is going to be different. But I know like Governor Cuomo has put out some guidelines of things that he was talking about, a phased reopening. And I would say if they're able to get the number of new infections low enough so that we can identify and isolate cases and use the power of quarantine orders and isolation orders to get the people who we know, the known infectious people, isolated, and out of the community, when that, at some point, hopefully soon, we're going to get to a point where that's a tool that we can use. And I would say personally, until that is a tool that we can use where it's not as widespread in the community, to where there's sustained community transmission and there's just these isolated clusters, if we can get it from the whole community just having it to getting these clusters back, we can consolidate those clusters even more and isolate the infection. So we'll see how the next couple weeks go. The ground that we've made in New York City is impressive. And it's encouraging that we've been able to kind of get to the point where we are. We're definitely not over, there's some version of a loosening in sight for us. But I think to save the most lives, we have to be really judicious about what our standards for opening up are. And then just take our own kind of personal responsibility. And if you can still minimize as much as you're out as possible, to do that. Even when they do let things up, just know that it's better to kind of still practice some kind of distancing until we know that this thing is like really stomped out. Because we don't want to be part of, the second wave. The first wave was too drastic.
I just want to reiterate too, like social distancing is sort of like the only tool we have right now. And then I think while it's definitely hard to sort of maintain that when you live in, New York City apartments, you have roommates, like most of us can't afford to live like alone. But also like even on subways, interactions, like as much as possible, like try to maintain 6 feet of distance between you and someone else, and like make sure to wear a mask. Like set an example too for like your friends, family members, that like you are taking social distancing serious, because really that's all we can do right now until we have a vaccine. Yeah. I think like a vaccine, or until we like are in a better place.
Yeah, I mean we'll get there. I just think that we all have to kind of we have to suspend what used to be normal. We may not get there for a while. So I think hearkening back to whatever that pre-corona, normal was, we may not get there for a while, but we'll find we'll get through it and we'll figure it out, And I think looking back to the pre-corona time, I think it's always easy to look at when things were better through rose-colored glasses. But if we really look back to the pre-corona time, things still weren't as good. They weren't good. We didn't feel it as viscerally as a lot of us are feeling it now, but they weren't good. It was the world that we lived in before this thing. That was the setup for this thing playing out now, where you have marginalized communities suffering at insane rates. You have in the African American community, it makes about 13% of the population, making in some jurisdictions over 60% of deaths, and that's all set up and based on a system where in the pre-corona world, all these people were vulnerable and all of these things were going on that set them all up to be severely impacted by this. And understanding that would help us understand what is the response that we need to make to the coronavirus so that we can keep people healthy and safe. But understanding that it can't be just going back to the old way, because that old way wasn't good enough, and looking to see what are the policies that we need to make so people can have that health care, so that certain communities aren't all prone to having all of these bad comorbidities, or all of these communities aren't housing insecure or job insecure, or all have bad education. That's what we should be looking for, and that's what we should be advocating for. And it's not just, we shouldn't be looking for the scraps anymore and getting handouts or looking for stimulus packages that barely stimulate anything. We need to be looking for drastic change. And I think it's when you really look about how do you get the change, it's not just about being a liberal and thinking that things are messed up, or, being able to acknowledge how messed up things are. It's moving from being just a liberal good person to being progressive, to being action oriented and wanting to move things forward, and asking yourself, what am I doing to move things forward? How am I making this place better? What am I contributing?